Hello, wonderful audience, esteemed guests, and fellow healthcare enthusiasts. Welcome to episode 16 of our Decoding AI in Healthcare series. I'm Dr. Harshita Gupta, your host for today's exciting journey into the world of healthcare innovation. Without any further ado, let's get this show on the road by introducing our first guest, Jessica Parker, an educator, researcher, entrepreneur. She is the owner and founder of the Dissertation by Design, co-founder of the Academic Insight Lab, and a lecturer in the Doctors of Healthcare Administration program at MCPHS University. Jessica's research interests are at the intersection of technology and education. She is particularly intrigued by the potential of generative AI for academic purposes, exploring how this technology can revolutionize the way we conduct research, teach, and learn. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Next, we have Kimberly Becker, an applied linguist who specializes in disciplinary academic writing and English for research publication purposes. Her most recent publications are related to the use of ethical AI for academic research and writing, and a co-authored ebook titled Preparing to Publish about composing academic research manuscripts. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And now we have Dr. Deepu Patel, a digital health consultant. Dr. Deepu's expertise lies in her unique blend of clinical insights and a profound understanding of technology's role in enhancing patient education and advocacy. Her belief that even as technology and education evolve, the human touch in healthcare remains irreplaceable. With such a stellar lineup, I'm thrilled to kick off today's webinar on AI and research, use cases, and implementation. Welcome, Deepu, and now over to you.
Thank you so much, Harshita. Welcome, Jessica. Welcome, Kimberly. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us and share about your insights in what is, I guess, really taking over the world in terms of the technology and the use cases that we're seeing. You both bring a very interesting lens to generative AI. It's, in fact, niche within a niche, I think I would say. But let's start off with Jessica, if you could just explain or tell us about Academic Insight Lab and like how it came to be and its roots.
Yeah, sure. Happy to share. It's interesting. If you had ever asked me like a year ago that this is what I'd be doing, that I would be running an AI ed tech company, I would have laughed because I'm not a computer scientist, never really had any interest in technology in this way. I mean, obviously we all interact with technology and it's integrated in every facet of our lives, but thinking about like actually building educational tools using AI was not something I was interested in. It came about through, honestly, Kim and I just became obsessed with generative AI. We started doing research back in March, whenever ChatGPT 3 was released. We started exploring like its features and functionalities from the perspective as educators. Like we're both consultants, educators, and researchers. And we were initially just thinking about like, well, how can we leverage this technology to augment our approach to like teaching and research and writing? And then that's really what started it. So we had our first manuscript that we published on, we were looking at ChatGPT for automated writing evaluation. And that's where I started to learn quite a bit from Kimberly as an applied linguist. She started to help me think about, okay, well, this is a large language model. At the end of the day, language is a tool. So how can we use this as a tool in various contexts? And obviously in our case, academic context. And so that first publication started it all, and that was in March. And then we started exploring it a bit more for research purposes. Like how can qualitative researchers leverage this technology in order to, I don't know, develop interview protocols and pilot interview protocols, really trying to solve problems that we encounter regularly as educators and researchers. And I don't know, one weekend I discovered this no code platform that allowed me to start building AI tools. And so that's where Kimberly and I really started bringing forth our domain expertise in research writing. And honestly, it feels like decades have gone by, but it's only been like 5 months. Like we started building these tools really for like my students and our clients through the consulting company, and for each other. Like we started using them as researchers. And, I just thought, let's just see if this is going to go anywhere. Let's see if people are interested in this. And so we whipped up a website, put the tools online, and then it just took off. Like it has been, I don't know, a whirlwind since then. But yeah, that's how it all started. Really last like March is when we started this journey and officially launched Academic Insight Lab last fall. And now we have like 3,000 users, like this wonderful, vibrant community of anywhere from like master's degree students who have never, have no research experience, all the way to seasoned faculty who are leveraging this technology to like improve their manuscripts and participate in peer review. And yeah, so that's how we got started.
And I do want to dive a little bit deeper into the manuscript writing, because I think what you and Kimberly have done is really start to allay some of those fears around plagiarism and copywriting and things like that. But before that, I do want to ask Kimberly about her expertise, because I do think that not many will be familiar with the field of applied linguistics. So why don't you tell us lay people who may not know what exactly you do? And it's not a new field per se, but it's a new application to within AI, I think. So if you could tell us about yourself and how you got into applied linguistics, Kimberly.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for this question. So if linguistics is the study of the science of language, it's very theoretical. Applied linguistics is the application of that knowledge to some domain. And for me, it always was teaching English as an additional language, especially for academic purposes. So I had about a decade of experience teaching immigrants and refugees at a community college in Nashville, Tennessee. And that is where my experience started in this field. And then I went back and got a PhD and got much more interested in the kind of research world of English for research publication purposes. So working with graduate students and postdocs to help them understand that academic writing is a genre, and there are certain linguistic forms that we can learn and apply to become better at it, because I really believe that it's a non-native language for everybody, even for native English speakers. It's not like I started graduate school and had an easy time figuring out how to do this. It's very esoteric, I guess, this type of writing. And so that's how I approach the teaching of it. And that's how we built these tools that we made, is with coaching and teaching in mind, so that they're not writing for you, but they're just coaching you through the process and helping you notice the genre characteristics.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that writing in any form, and in your case, and both of your cases, academic research writing, is a skill set. And it's a skill set that I think needed to be developed. And I think, you both bring a very unique lens to what AI is doing in terms of shifting how we approach academic writing and research, because the fields you're in are not new, right? Research and linguistics, all of these things are existing fields, but now we're looking at it through a very fresh lens and how we're applying the science of computer science. And I can, as someone who does not come from a technical background, I can truly appreciate how applied linguistics, even in the computer world, in the technology world, can be an uphill battle, right? It's a skill set that I think we are all kind of grappling with and learning. Although, I think there will come a time where what you said, Jessica, about using no-code tools will become the norm. I think it is becoming the norm, to be honest. But we're still going to need to know the nuances of code to a degree, because it will still inform the new aspects of AI and the application of AI in all the fields, specifically in your fields, in the field of academic writing. So I guess we'll dive into the question that you actually started with, Jessica, earlier, or referenced earlier, which is, how is AI reshaping academic research in medicine, or I guess in general? Because I think to your point about writing papers, and we're hearing more and more journals coming out with statements and guidelines on AI. And I know your focus is more in the graduate world, or the in the academic world itself. And so I think we can start there. And I think that's a good place to start, because you're addressing it from the root, rather than, those who have already graduated and have some skill set around academic writing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts. So I remember being exposed to, so Sarah Eaton, she's in Calgary, Canada. She has this incredible framework on post-plagiarism. And I think that is a nice framework for thinking about this, in the sense that, so from the perspective of a student, because I still teach students, I teach academic and scholarly writing courses. And, academic integrity, concerns around cheating and plagiarism, these are not new. These are, we've been thinking about these things since the beginning of time in terms of higher ed. But now that we have this technology available, there seems to be a lot of focus on cheating and plagiarism and AI detection. But I actually really agree with Sarah Eaton and her work, and that we're in this post-plagiarism era. And what that really means is that hybrid human AI writing is going to become the norm. It's already becoming the norm, even if you think your students might not be using it. Even when I say that, my intention is not to make it sound like students are using it in ways that are violating academic integrity. I think that most students do come to us and they want to learn, and they don't want to cut corners. And so they want to learn how to use these tools ethically and responsibly. And so embracing this idea of this post-plagiarism era, what Eaton calls it, is where we think about leveraging AI to augment our approach to research and writing, and having this new paradigm where you think about AI as a peer, as a collaborative partner. And so just to give some concrete examples, so in my writing course, typically we have these discussion boards where students interact with each other. And for a while now, I think we can all admit that online discussion boards aren't necessarily, working that well for all of us. And then I have small cohorts too, where, a student might say, okay, well, there's 8 people in a cohort, and they're like, okay, well, it's Sunday, I'm waiting to do my peer responses and no one's responded to mine. And it's just, it's just not working. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, we're going to start. Yes, yes, exactly. And so I was like, let's just start by using AI as a peer. And so use ChatGPT or any of these other large language models as a peer in that process, where you're engaging in a dialogue just as you would a peer in your program. And so I think that is a really good starting point for students who are just learning this technology, is to just teach them how to engage in dialogue. It's a chatbot. And so that's the starting point. And then getting them to then think critically about the output. So what I'm starting to get into is functional and critical AI literacy, where first they're learning what are the capabilities and the functionalities and the limitations of it, and then how did they become critical users of it. And I think those are just some simple first steps that can be taken with students so that they can get comfortable with the technology. And only then, once they become super users of it, can they really even start to understand the impact of what it means for their academic writing practice. And I think that also definitely holds true for, for faculty. I don't think faculty are well positioned to teach the students these literacies until we're ready to model how we're using it ourselves. And the first step is just engaging in dialogue. We're negotiating meaning, just like Kimberly talked about in second language learning. There's all this meaning negotiation that happens. And so at the most basic level, it is changing research writing in that way. Like I can instantly explore different perspectives, explore counter arguments. I can ask questions that maybe I might be afraid to ask of someone, of a colleague, or think about a student who might have fears around asking those questions. As a faculty member, now they can ask those questions of the AI and engage in like really meaningful dialogue to help advance their skills. So sorry, that was like a long-winded answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
No, I mean, I think you brought up a couple of points where, you know, you're encouraging use of the technology in a responsible and ethical way. And I think a couple of points that you touched on that I think resonate with me, and the philosophy that I try to also employ is educate the educator, because we need to know how to use this first. And know the limits of it, know, you know, how to kind of harness it for the betterment of our own critical thinking and functionality. But that way we can model the best practices for our students, right? And so, Kimberly, I think because you bring that in, that lens of linguistics to it, what do you have examples of when you have kind of like as Jessica brought up about teaching students how to use this in a responsible way? Do you have examples of how generative AI is being used to analyze and synthesize medical literature, or in literature in general, I guess? And what are some of the pros and cons around the use of this in real life that you've seen?
Well, first, let me say, I think the term generative AI kind of undersells what it's capable of, because you think about language. Yeah, I mean, we think about language like language is just the evidence of what's happening in here, right? We talk. And so that when I first played with ChatGPT, my initial thought was, if it can generate, then it knows kind of why it's generating things in a specific structure, in a specific order, because that's what we do as humans. That's how language works. It's never random. It's never arbitrary. It follows rules. Computers are really good at following rules, so that's what's happening. It's just generating these patterns, this predictive, technological, you know, algorithmic patterns. So that's the first thing I like to tell people is, you know, because with students, especially, I think once it generates something for them, they can't unsee it. They can't, you know, so if
I mean, I think that's true for everybody, right? You automatically become biased, maybe the wrong word, but like biased to whatever it says, the way it said it, I think is what you're getting at.
Yeah, so we're trying to educate people to prompt it in such a way that it's teaching you why this new pattern that it has generated for you is better, so that you're learning like the signals and the structure of the output, instead of, oh, that sounds way better than what I could have come up with. Let me just take that and run with it, right?
Right.
So I don't know if you want to get into the scientific or the medical aspect of it, but
Please do. Please.
Yeah. So what I've been really interested in recently, and this comes from my background, is within applied linguistics, there's a more specific field that my research centers around, which is corpus linguistics. And so I'm very interested in these databases that are being queried by large language models in certain use cases. For example, we have a number of companies coming out now with academic research databases. So they are connecting like ChatGPT or GPT-4 to the Semantic Scholar corpus, which is a database of academic and scientific research. Skews very heavily towards the biomedical sciences. So it's really relevant for this particular audience. And so basically you have this database and you have the language model, and it's, instead of you searching the database and then getting hits for this piece of research, this other piece of research, you know, as a list of links, you're getting natural language that gives you an overview of what's happening in the literature. And then it will populate links so that you can click on. There's a number of companies doing this. I mean, just to name a few: Elicit, Cite, Consensus, Litmaps, Research Rabbit, Size, I mean, on and on.
On and on, yeah.
Yeah, and for this audience, these are great places to start because, as I said, that corpus, that semantic scholar corpus, most of them use that, skews very heavily in the biomedical fields.
Right.
And so if you're looking for something in that general domain, you're very likely to find some great sources. But if you're not in that domain, you need to be really careful because what it's giving you is not a full picture of the literature. Even if you are in that domain, what it's
Right.
giving cannot be a full picture. It's only what's there in that database. So we have to know what's in that corpus, and we have to like really question the representativeness of that so that we can make an informed, and that's what Jessica was saying, like this critical literacy, like, okay, well, what is it
Right.
generating and how can I be sure of it?
Yeah, and I think you highlighted a very important point, and I do want to ask a follow-up on that. But for our audience, is these large language models are trained on information that is available, and they are limited to a certain date, right? Like, I'm drawing a blank on when GPT-4 stopped. I want to say it was late last year, I think.
I think it's April of 2023.
23. Okay, so now it's already old in the sense of everything after April 2023 is not included in GPT-4, right? So anything for our for biomedical kind of thing, if you asked it for references, it would not show anything after April 2023, which is a big gap to have when it comes to medical literature. So to kind of provide that context, but to your point, Kimberly, I think using this corpus linguistics base and saying that we're going to use Semantic Scholar as our database to train this, I guess, I mean, I don't know, would you still call it a large language or a small language model at this point? But, you know, whatever the nomenclature is, we're using it to train it specifically for this area, which will help you kind of do better research when you are looking for articles. But that brings me to my next point around hallucinations, right? So, and there's a lot of discussion in this area where is hallucination the right term to use for these models? We're not going to get into that today. We'll just use hallucinations, but hallucinations, for our audience who may not know, are basically fake or made up references or information that is not valid and not true and completely made up by the large language model, which behooves us to ask, I guess, right? Do you think hallucinations are less in something like consensus or using Semantic Scholar versus overall general use of ChatGPT-4? I do think it's gotten better from my use from 4, but I still think it does make up enough information where I do have to read everything extra carefully still. And I'd love both of your thoughts on that.
I mean, so these models have gotten better. I mean, the hallucination rate has gone down.
Yeah.
But this is where, I mean, yes, functional and critical literacy comes into play. Like I would tell my students, like ChatGPT is not where you want to go if you're trying to find sources, to find peer-reviewed sources. Like that's not what you're using ChatGPT for. You know, using something, even using like SciSpace or Elicit, but they're powered by GPT-4. So let's just take Elicit, for example. Scite also does this, but you know, you can ask it a research question and it will populate a summary at the top. And it says, okay, summary of top 4 papers. There's like a lot of different ways you can approach this. Like tell my students, well, do you know what it means by how does it define the top 4 papers? Like, do you even understand how they're defining that? And then also when you look at the summary, like you need to read every word, you need to look at every reference. And so those are not going to be hallucinations in that sense. Like it is going to link to an actual source, but within that, you know, 4 to 5 sentence summary, there might be a sentence or a word that is not relevant at all to the question you actually asked. It might not be something that's totally, you know, valid, but it might not be relevant to the question that you posed. There's like layers to this when we think of hallucinations and accuracy. It's not always just like binary, right or wrong. It's also thinking about like the relevancy based on the question that you're asking, also based on the field that you're in. Like, you know, I would not recommend being in the humanities and using cite because that's not their corpus is for biomedical domains. It's like there's layers to that, but I mean, hallucinations these models are getting better. They're getting a lot more accurate. And I do feel like at some point there will be 100% certainty that it's not going to provide inaccurate data. I think rather what's more likely to happen is maybe the data isn't accurately contextualized or the source isn't appropriately contextualized. And so this is where it can be really challenging for students who are not experts in their field and they don't yet have that domain expertise to be able to critically evaluate the output. And that's where I think it can be a bit tricky. Because even since, I mean, when Kimberly and I published our first article with GPT-3, it was like, I'm not going to get this right, but maybe there's like a 27% hallucination rate or something. And now it's all the way down to like 3 or 4. And that's in a year. So it's pretty accurate. But when you're using these models for, high stakes purposes like medicine or law or research, as we know, like just one word can take on a whole different meaning for a sentence or a finding or an implication or a conclusion. And so that's the level of critical evaluation that the students need to be engaged in. And so to some extent, some students aren't prepared for that. They're not ready to have that critical lens because they're just starting to become immersed in the discourse within their field. And so I think any discussion around hallucination and accuracy is like highly dependent upon the context. Like my mom might say, oh, I'm using it to plan a vacation. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to lecture her on hallucination and accuracy as much as I would, one of my doc students who's like trying to make healthcare decisions and evidence-based practice and things like that.
Yeah.
Really feel free to weigh in. I know you have thoughts on this too.
Kimberly, anything? Yeah, Kimberly, anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also really important to drill down a bit on what we mean by hallucination, not to confuse the terms, but the other term people are throwing around is like confabulation.
Oh, yes.
So let me illustrate this with a story. So I have a colleague, and she's pretty well established in her field. And she started getting, in the last year, emails from people who are using ChatGPT to do academic research. And she was getting questions like something along the lines of, I see that you have a framework on X, but I can't find this source anywhere. Can you please direct me to the right place? And then she knows that she has not written, but it's in the right discipline, even sub-discipline. It fits with her experience and her repertoire of research. And so it's going to get it generally right. That's why we say it's confidently wrong. So it had her name, it had her in the right discipline. And again, she's been researching for a number of years. So, someone who's new to the field, it's not going to pick them up, but she's been in this space for a while. But it totally made up this framework that she had no knowledge of and had never published. But the framework made a little bit of sense. And so, this person needed to know this because, again, it's able to get it generally right. It's like a blurry, image of something. And so what's beneficial about using a system like Elicit or Cite or those that we've been talking about is that it populates just like natural language, like a little, like Jessica said, a little kind of paragraph about the literature. And then within that paragraph, it hyperlinks documents, the exact citation, so that you can pull them up and you can see where it's drawing that information from. Whereas with ChatGPT, even with a premium upgraded, you can't do that.
You can't.
So it provides this extra layer of transparency, and that's what that's the next step. And that involves work, right? Like we have to be diligent about finding it if we're going to use it. So that's the other thing I want.
that's an excellent example. And actually, my next question was going to be, what are the primary challenges faced by academics? And I think you kind of highlighted it perfectly, because it is one of the things that I caution a lot of faculty who want to use this and kind of, unleash it upon their students, right? Like, it's like they almost feel like there's this tool and we're almost not allowing our students to use this tool. My first question to those faculty is, do you know how to use this tool? Do you know how to responsibly engage with it? Do you know what the limitations are? And I will say the limitations of it are growing and expanding on a daily basis, but so are the use cases, in which case every use case is going to come with a limitation. And so it's still evolving. And I think both of you have a good understanding of the challenges that we face in academia when we're trying to teach students what, I guess, this is a horrible word for it, but like the old skills, like traditional literature review, traditional, using PubMed to do a literature review and find the articles based on your research question. And because I think those skills, to be honest, are going to be much, much more important in light of AI and how we're kind of harnessing it now. So I'd love your thoughts on how you go about now. Like, I have some ideas on how I would do this in a course, teaching in a course, for example, evidence-based medicine, a very common course taught in many medical programs and schools. How you leverage this to really use it as a tool rather than an quote unquote easy way out for writing, right? And if both of you could expand on what do faculty have to do, and then how can we enhance that learning for our students? Jessica, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, yes, first, it's a matter of learning to use it yourself. And I use the term super user. Like, I truly believe that until you start, like, I was actually talking to someone recently and she was asking for advice about how to kind of like get started with this, because it's overwhelming. I mean, there's a lot of information being thrown at us, and I think faculty are overwhelmed. And there's also this like traditional tension, I think, with ed tech, where too many times in the past we've thought of, ed tech companies coming in and like throwing throwing technology at a problem instead of actually thinking about, is this something that needs to be solved with technology? But anyways, back to your question. So I tell faculty, like, spend some more time using it yourself. Like, slow down and think about, okay, this is how I would normally go about my process, and still do that normal process. Like, still do your due diligence. This isn't about cutting corners. And so, like, when I'm approaching a lit review, for instance, I still do my normal lit review process. I still go through my typical databases. I still approach it the same way, but then I add in these different AI tools. And inevitably what happens is I end up finding additional articles that are relevant to the topic. I end up learning something new about the topic that I'm researching. And so it's like triangulation of like your typical process. And then you add in maybe, like, I think of it as like, okay, my triangle would be like, okay, I use ChatGPT 4, and that's where I'm brainstorming. I'm thinking about my argumentation. What are the different criticisms of this? What are potential theories that could be applied? I'm thinking about outlines. And then I'm doing my typical lit search process where I might be using, Google Scholar, my university database. And then I added an AI tool, such as something like Elicit or Cite, or even Perplexity, depending on the types of sources that I'm trying to identify. And so I think when faculty hear that, they realize, like, oh, so I'm not like having to learn something totally new. I'm not totally dropping the typical process. I'm doing what I normally do. And now I'm adding in this other like stack of technology. And I think the outcome is really higher quality. I think that my research is better for it. I think that I've been able to not only just identify additional sources, but I think my ability to like sharpen my argumentation skills, even thinking about things like cultural sensitivity. Like, Kimberly and I talked a lot about this when an article we wrote on developing interview protocols, like the different cultural contexts. And now we have this tool that we can use to explore like what develop an interview protocol for someone in a different culture and how that might be received and what language might be used. And that could also be applied for like any scenario in research, because research inherently involves usually human subjects. And so, yeah, just the implications, I feel like the applications are endless, but I think the first way to approach it is do what you normally do and then add this in. And as long as you're doing your due diligence and you have that like at least baseline layer of expertise and knowledge, you're going to be perfectly positioned to evaluate the output of the tool that you're using.
Yeah. Kimberly,
Yeah.
anything else to add to that?
No, yeah, I was gonna say just lead with the use case and the task you need to accomplish and decide, and don't lead with the tool or the tech.
Right.
We don't use it just because we can. We use it because we need it, and there's some reason usually because something is not humanly scalable or we couldn't do it otherwise. And that,
Yeah,
I think that
I think you make an excellent point there, Kimberly. Lead with the human element rather than the tech element, right? And it's one of the things that I always say, that no matter what we have in terms of technology, the human element is always going to be at the core and probably the most important aspect of it. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As you're seeing this space evolve, what I am noticing, and I think I think it's going to take a little bit more time in the healthcare field to really expand what interdisciplinary practice and means. But what we're seeing more and more are scientists and data scientists and analysts and researchers really becoming core to the clinical practicing team. And I think you both are in academia. One of the things that I say pretty often, at least to colleagues, is, we need to prepare our current generation who is going through college and graduate school to be prepared to practice in these new or expanded interdisciplinary areas. Are there other professions? I mean, I think, Kimberly, your expertise in applied linguistics, I would not be surprised if we would have a boon of applied linguists on healthcare teams in the future. Do you have any others to kind of add to that? Either of you?
I mean, it's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, for a long time, I've been telling people everybody needs a linguist on their team, but I'm a little bit biased.
Well, I think, to what Jessica made an earlier point about how one word can change the meaning, and also the tone of what is being said. One of the things that I forget who I was saying it to recently, but I was like, ChatGPT doesn't understand sarcasm, right? Like, that's something that's a very human, it's a human connection, and someone who is very sarcastic by nature, I kind of feel like, it doesn't, when you ask it to understand sarcasm, it's not going to understand it. And I think it's a great example of how you need to realize that although it may give you information in text that sounds natural and human-like, it itself is not human. And as we interact with this tool and this technology, one of the things that we need to be very mindful of is the application of the information that it spits out to us in terms of whether it's data or text or whatever. The application of it is to another human being, right? And I think it's as important in medical writing and research, obviously. I think the nuances of it are going to be really, really important as we move forward. So in that vein, what advice do you have for whether it be grad students or even academics or like faculty like myself, in terms of writing manuscripts going forward using this, and perhaps even touching upon, a lot of journals have come out with some AI guidelines. Either they want it, or they're okay with it as long as you disclose it, or they don't want it at all. Where do you both fall in that realm? I have very mixed feelings about it, just so you know.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see changes too. So I have this my first thought is I have this very simple framework that I use, and it's just called the AI sandwich framework. And it's basically use AI in the beginning to brainstorm and ideate. Like, this is where I think its application really shines in terms of research and manuscript writing. So you think of how the amount of time involved, or the writer's block that sometimes happens when you have an idea and you're really trying to conceptualize a study. I would immediately go into a large language model like ChatGPT and just start brainstorming ideas. And then I take that information and then I use that just as I would if I had turned to a colleague who was right beside of me, who can play the role of a domain expert in whatever my field is, just like I'm brainstorming with them. That's not cheating. That's not cutting corners. And then I do the writing, I do the drafting. But during that drafting process, there's inevitably going to be moments. I mean, if anyone's listening to this has written a manuscript before, like, you know that there's moments where you get stuck in the process of writing. Like, you're trying to consider different perspectives, or you're even sometimes just trying to think through, like, am I missing a step? Is this process really clear? Like, the clarity we need in our methods, is this replicable? Even then taking that into ChatGPT and asking it, like, as I'm describing this process, are the steps clear? Are there gaps in my logic, gaps in my argumentation? Like, using it as a peer in that way, that is very different than saying, like, here's some bullet points, write up my method section for me. Yeah, like, there's a clear difference there. And so when we think about the framework, it's like brainstorming and ideation. The human does the drafting. And then once you have a draft, once you've done the hard work, the heavy lift of producing something, then feeding it back into the AI and asking it to serve as a peer reviewer, but giving it the criteria. You know, if you ask AI, just like if you went to 10 different people and said, give me feedback, 10 people are going to focus on different things. And so asking the AI, like, very pointed questions, giving it the criteria that you're looking for feedback. And the benefits of that are endless as well, because it forces you to be much more explicit and have clarity around what the strengths and weaknesses are of your own writing. And so I feel like you become more, like, intimately familiar with your own writing skills and areas of weakness that need to be improved. And so that's sort of the framework that I like to teach, is that, like, sandwich where it's like AI in the beginning, human in the middle, AI at the end.
I love that. And it continues, right? And also, I think for me, and I have not called it the sandwich, but I think that's the process I've kind of used, is I usually use it for ideation. And I love, by the way, like, when you do that last part of AI as a peer reviewer, it doesn't replace the human peer reviewer, right? Like, that part still is there after the fact, and yet the human will still come back with things that you had not considered, or the AI hadn't considered. So I think that allows you, to your point, to really critically upskill your skill set in writing, right? Even as someone who has written quite a bit, I'm still learning how to frame something, how to write it. And to me, I use it as as another tool, as I would, like, to your point, where you get stuck and I'm like, I don't know what word I want, and I open up the thesaurus and I'm like, tell me what word kind of matches that. That's kind of how I use it, right? Like, or I'll put my asterisk there and I'll just keep writing and come back to that sentence at a later time. And so that's kind of, again, this is the way to use it, as a tool rather than a substitute for your own thought processes and thinking. So I'm going to kind of come up with my maybe second to last. Amit has just joined us, so he might have a couple of questions. But one of the questions that I want to ask is, what do you see in the next 3 to 5 years, or dare I say 10, some of the emerging trends in this space? Like, what have we not thought of yet? I mean, I kind of feel like it's a loaded question for all of us because none of us know where we're going with this. But what do you foresee in the sense of medical literature and writing and academic writing? What do you both foresee?
So we're really interested in this idea of using AI as a partner for creating scenarios that wouldn't otherwise be possible. So we're working with a colleague from Quebec in creating some interactive scenarios where AI is serving the role of kind of Jessica, help me here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like these agents where it's like a simulation scenario. So yeah,
By the way,
simulations where you have AI agents.
Just for our audience, they just modeled what human in the loop means for everyone, right? Like Kimberly was lost for a word and Jessica just put it. I mean, this is the kind of collaboration that really does need to continue to happen in this space.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Kimberly, so continue. You were saying they're creating these agents.
Yeah, like
Kimberly,
simulation.
do you want to describe them?
Yeah, I mean, Jessica can speak more to the maybe the medical side of it, but just with anything, putting yourself in a scenario where you don't know really what's coming, and so it's more realistic in the sense of, you can give a student a case study and everything's written out, but as you implement things, something's always going to happen out of nowhere that you don't expect. And this is any domain, any field. And so with AI as that kind of unexpected agent coming in, so that you don't give all the information at once, it kind of ekes its way in like it happens in reality. And I'll let Jessica speak more to specific scenarios. But yeah, simulation kind of is what I think is coming.
Nice.
Yeah, I think when you think about the implications I recently submitted a manuscript where the crux of it was around interdisciplinary training for health sciences students and employability. And so I get really excited when I think about simulations because I used to do simulation research at Northeastern University.
That is how we met.
That's how we know each other. Yes. And so you think about one, how much time and energy and effort goes into creating a scenario for a simulation and carrying that out. And then you think about the layers of assessment that occurs and how you have to prepare for that, and then how you have to carry that out, and the human capital involved in doing all of these things, not to mention all the money that is spent on the actual simulation studio. And so I'm not saying that we would replace that entire model, but now we can come up with simulations rather quickly. We can have an AI help us build out simulations for all different types of scenarios. We can then build a virtual environment and have AI agents that are acting out a series of tasks based off of the goal that they've been assigned for the specific scenario. And the students are in the simulation environment and they don't know if they're interacting with another student or if they're interacting with an AI, like everyone has their avatar. And you can quickly play out any sort of scenario where students will likely encounter at some point in the workplace that are specific to anything, like whatever you can dream of, you can build out this scenario for the students. And so it's forcing us to have, now we have this whole new field around generative AI and assessment. So what does it mean for assessment now if you have you think about your typical course where you would take preclinical students who are going in a simulation lab, now we have this whole new way of teaching and evaluating those skills in a simulation environment that's low stakes. It's not as expensive. It's much easier to tweak the scenario in real time based on real time feedback. And so that's what is really exciting to me about those possibilities. Yeah. And we already have that technology.
What we're seeing, I think, and if I may just kind of brainstorm here, I think is the foundations and the seeds of the metaverse really becoming embedded in our academic and educational
Mhm.
practice. And I think I think in the next 5 to 10 years, that's where we're going to be. And much to the chagrin of many clinical providers, when we did away with the hands-on exams at the end of medical school or PA school, where we would have those, I think those are going to be replaced with these metaverse and virtual simulations. Well, that kind of wraps it up for us. I'm going to ask Amit if he has any questions. If not, Harshita, we can certainly open it up for a Q&A from our audience.
Yeah, hi Deepu, and a late welcome to Jessica and Kimberly from my side. I mean, that's the perk of being a clinician. I could not make it to you guys on time. But to just be very honest with you folks, I've been listening to this whole conversation happening. I was watching this through the app, the MedSynapse app, while I was driving. And I was actually quite fascinated with the discussions that you trio were doing. And what I must say, Kimberly and Jessica, you both have probably mastered some of the very important nuances of how ethically and structurally you can use artificial intelligence in this whole domain of manuscript writing and editorial process. And this is something that I have often discussed with Deepu, that I'm a part of the editorial team of a few medical journals. And there are two things that I always see. There is always an inertia of using these AI tools, into the proper organized editorial process. And there is also a lack of direction to the editorial team as to how they can direct or instruct or guide the authors who are submitting their projects of using artificial intelligence into their writing in an organized way. And I think both of you have answered, with all the use cases that you were saying a while back, both of you have answered to those questions to a lot, but I guess 1 hour is not enough. I'm sure we can have you back, and maybe we can even plan a workshop with you, because I would have a whole editorial team listening to you guys, how you have mastered this. So, I mean, fantastic. But I have got one question, a tricky question to both of you. Just before we end, we have Harshita coming in some questions. So when you're using an AI tool to sort of create your answers or guide you on your answers in manuscript writing or in the publication process or the editorial process, of course, you have to mention which tool you're using, which version you're using. That is very important. Now, what if the output goes wrong or it goes unnoticed? Then who do you catch liable? Who is the person who needs to be caught guilty here? Is it the author? Is it the publisher? Or is it the editor?
Loaded question.
Any of you can
I
take
love
that.
it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, we know that ChatGPT is not an author, and so we have to take responsibility for what we put out there. It's our ultimate responsibility. And this also goes back to when you are publishing or writing a grant. The NSF released guidance. They have very strict ways in like how you can and cannot use generative AI. So I think first is like understanding those guidelines and following them and adhering to them. Second is, if it is allowed, making sure that you acknowledge and cite how you use generative AI in the process. But yeah, at the end of the day, the buck stops with the authors. Like, it's our responsibility to oversee the output and to critically evaluate it and to fully take, responsibility for it. And I think it's really interesting to see guidelines as they come out, because they are definitely evolving. I think we're all just still very much trying to wrap our heads around this and make sense of it. But it's been encouraging. Like, a journal even reached out to us and wants us to help them integrate generative AI into their peer review process as part of some of the initial screening, in order to give authors much more like in-depth, high-quality feedback on their manuscript before it officially goes through peer review as an initial screening process. And so I love to see journals who are like really thinking ahead and thinking about how to leverage it. But the reality is like, this is all so new, and we don't really understand the implications of what all of this means in terms of like, if we start to allow authors to use it open-endedly, I can't imagine that would happen. But then what does it mean if most of the internet is populated with AI generated text that's being used to then generate new text? So that's just like this interesting theory that's going around that goes back to like, is it going to implode because it's now consuming its own text to generate new text? But that's a whole other conversation we don't need to get into
That's a
right now.
philosophical discussion that will take hours.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
yes, but it is
and
fascinating.
also the, what is going to be a very important key factor is that, we need to stratify at each level of the entire editorial process, right from the authorship to the publication, as to how much of the AI you're allowing the individual to use. And it has to be stratified. I think that's what Jessica was talking about, that if you let them give an open-ended access, then you would probably get a manuscript which is probably going to be thoroughly peer-reviewed, critically appraised totally by the AI tool with no role of the peer reviewer. So I think that also needs to be sort of quantified as to how much of AI you can utilize in, while you're using it as a reviewer, while you're using it as the section editor, or if you're the managing editor, or if you're the, editor in chief. So those are the places. But Jessica, Kimberly, I am definitely reaching out to you guys for the journals that I'm a part of the editorial team. I'm reaching out to you guys to help us structure that. Definitely, we are doing that.
Yeah, there
Perfect.
actually
I love it.
is a published article called Guiding, I was just looking it up, Guiding Principles and Proposed Classification System for the Responsible Adoption of AI in Scientific Writing in Medicine.
Yes.
We actually use that when we tell anybody in any field, because we feel like if it's good enough for a field in which lives are at stake, then it's good enough. It's certainly good enough for, linguistics.
And we have, yeah, and at one end, it's always good to name the journals that are doing fantastic work. At one end, we have the NEJMAI. I mean, they have beautifully adopted ethical use of artificial intelligence into their writing, into their editorial process. Even JAMA is doing that, as much as I know. And then there are some journals, that I know which are very resistant. I mean, they're not even accepting, even if you're acknowledging the use of AI tools into your writing. So yes, there has to be a common place that we have to come to. And before we come to that common place, it's important that, we take a step ahead in educating this peer group about, how they can actually learn and leverage the ethical use of AI into their research implementation. So once again, for that note, really big thanks to both of you for joining us. And Deepu is always been so helpful in filling up the shoes that I miss out. I mean, she's been fantastic a co-host, and thanks for leading this episode, Deepu. So Harshita, can we have some questions now from our audience?
Yes, so we'll take one question. So the question is, how might AI assist in the identification and mitigation of potential research fraud or misconduct?
Excellent question.
Can take the answer from both of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And we know that AI detection systems as they are right now are not accurate. And so Jessica and I are big proponents of telling, especially people in positions of power, not to use them, because they end up, you could end up falsely accusing someone. But I just saw some new research coming out of like the computational linguistics field, where corpus researchers are looking at the words that are frequently generated by these generative AI,
Like transformative.
Yes, and delve into, and so they counted the frequencies, and they identified this subset of words. And so now they're saying that, they were looking at a group of like 60,000 journal articles, and they were saying that there was evidence in about 1% of them that this was, and not from an AI detector, but just from, more of an empirical, like the frequency of these words has increased, and it started in the year 2023. So
that's interesting. That is really interesting, Kimberly.
I think it's an empirical question. Like, how can we do this? And I do think that will start with some computational linguists working together with, ethicists and figuring out how do we make this happen.
There will be a Wordle for an AI tool to detect the AI.
Yes,
Exactly.
You need an AI tool to detect AI plagiarism. I think that's what's going to be.
last week in one of the, I was telling a bunch of colleagues last week, I was like, the amount of times I asked ChatGPT to create something or asked me to say, frame the sentence, and it uses the word transformative. And I'm like, wow, they would think that I'm the most transformative person on the planet, because it's not a word that I would use in my writing on a date, except, if it was something with a project per se. But it is, to me, that's the word in the way I use GPT, it's the one that keeps popping up in my head. And I'm like, why is this word here? It's not transformative. It's just something I'm doing.
I think we're looking at a new term called AI plagiarism. And it's going to be really ironical when you're using generative AI to detect AI plagiarism.
Yes, I know. My gosh, like talk about, oh my God, I can't even like that. I mean, that's a philosophical discussion that we can go on forever. Well, thank you very much. We are looking for, thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Kimberly, for your time and engagement on this topic. Our next podcast is on April 16th, where we will be speaking with Sasha Dagave. I think I'm butchering his name, I'm sorry. And we will be talking about AI and life sciences. Also upcoming on May 9th, I will be hosting for our US audience, an AI workshop, so the basics of AI. This will be a 4-hour workshop that Amit and I and Mark Demara will be hosting. Stay tuned on our LinkedIn pages for links for registration and timings. Thank you, Harshita.
Yes, and we are really going to bring up this workshop to you, and it's a invitation to all our friends in the US to join in. The whole intent is to sort of give you that basic platform where you can learn and leverage, and maybe get that basic ground where you can start using AI tools, whether you're doing a research paper writing or creating a PowerPoint presentation or using it for building a clinical decision support system. If you put it in a bigger way, you can have the basic knowledge to start from. So that's the whole intent. And Deepu Patel will be leading this project in the US. And we're really looking forward to have some of our friends joining us in that workshop. So I think Harshita is going to put the link to that workshop even in the comment section of the discussion. And you can just click that and register for the workshop. And do remember there are limited seats, so the sooner you register, it's better.
Yeah, so as we draw this enriching conversation to a close, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished guests, Jessica, Kimberly, Deepu, and Dr. Amit, for their invaluable contributions and insight. And to our audience, we express sincere appreciation for your engagement and curiosity. Thank you for joining us today, and until we meet again, stay informed, stay inspired, and stay healthy. Goodbye.